The standard configuration for oxygen supply for the Optima CM is this. It's a 13 cubic foot, which is about 2-liter cylinder that mounts to the bottom of the unit. And this is what feeds the solenoid and the manual add valve. Now, the cylinder works great, but some people, especially people who are shorter, find that it adds too much to the overall length of the unit. And if we're traveling, not everybody's going to have this size cylinder for rent. So we need to be able to look at off-board options to take this oxygen supply cylinder off the unit and relocate it somewhere else. Now, we have a ton of options for that. We could take the same tank and put it on a pony bottle mount and mount that onto our doubles or our single tank. We could take a smaller tank, like a 2-liter steel, and mount that using a dry suit inflation tank mount onto our back plate. That works great with an inline valve. Or we can use a 30 or 40 cubic foot decompression cylinder and supply the oxygen for the unit off of this. Whatever we do, there's a couple of considerations that we need to keep in mind. The first consideration is the first stage regulator that goes in the oxygen supply tank. This is not a standard first stage regulator. This first stage is tuned to operate at 90 psi, which is much lower than the standard 140 psi of most first stages. That lower psi accommodates the solenoid that's inside the unit. If we put a standard first stage and connect it to the solenoid, that's going to wear the solenoid out prematurely, and it's going to cause solenoid failure. So it's very important to have the correct first stage on that oxygen supply cylinder. The second consideration is our connectors. So the standard connectors are this Y block with the low pressure nipple. This goes to the manual add valve, this goes to the solenoid, and this is where the oxygen supply hose connects. So we may need to lengthen this hose, which is just a standard regulator hose with that special lockout fitting on the end. So we can get a longer regulator hose if we're routing it from a pony bottle mount on our back or something like that. The way this is supposed to work is it's all put together and we hop in the water and we come out and we get back on land before we take it apart. If we were to hop in the water with this disconnected, we would get water into the Y block, which would flood our solenoid. So if we're diving with a stage cylinder where we might hand that up, or if we're diving off a rib or something like that where we're putting all our gear on in the water, this would not be the right connection type. We would want to switch to a dry connector. Something like a QC6, especially on a slightly longer hose that we could connect to the oxygen supply cylinder, that's going to be a much better option for us if we have to do anything in the water. And our last consideration is volume. The 13 cubic foot cylinder is an appropriate volume for a lot of diving. I wouldn't go very much smaller than this. Obviously, a 40 cubic foot is overkill, and when people use this to drive the unit, they're also typically using that as part of their open circuit bailout gas strategy, which involves putting a second stage onto the oxygen supply regulator. So when we're talking about offboard, we can use pony bottle mounts, stage bottle rigging, and inflation bottle mount. We have a variety of cylinder sizes that we can use, but we need to keep the 3 considerations in mind. Make sure we don't replace that first stage, that we're always using the proper 90 psi intermediate pressure first stage. Make sure that we're using the right fitting types for the environment we're doing, wet versus dry connectors, and ensure that we've got an appropriate volume for the dive. So that's some basics about offboarding with the Optima CM. Thank you for watching.